The internal enemy. For the warriors of antiquity, the greatest enemy was not before them with a sword in hand, but hidden in the silence, invisible, lodged within their own soul. Lust. No wall could protect them from this threat. No bronze shield, no polished armor. No allied army could fight this battle in their place, because this war was not fought outside, but inside. And the warrior who did not understand this was doomed to lose even before stepping onto the battlefield. Imagine a soldier about to face the most important fight of his life. He carries within him all the hope of his city, his family, his brothers in arms. But on the eve of battle, he indulges in excess, spends his energy on momentary pleasures, lets desire govern his mind. The next day, this man is no longer the same. He may even hold a spear, he may even shout war cries, but inside he has already been defeated. Lust has drained him, pleasure has stolen his strength, his mind has been corrupted. And that is precisely what many modern men do not realize. They think that today's weakness is just normal, that indulging in uncontrolled desire has no major consequences. But the ancient warriors knew. Each act of lust is like handing your sword to the enemy. It's like opening the gate of the fortress from within. There is no possible victory when the enemy already lives in the heart. Therefore, warrior cultures, from the Spartans to the samurai, from the warrior monks to the Roman soldiers, saw self-control as a sacred virtue. They understood, even without neuroscience, that sexual energy was not a toy. It was fire. And fire, when used with discipline, could forge weapons, light the way, warm life. But without control, that same fire burned, destroyed, turned the warrior to ashes before the battle began. Today you don't carry a shield or a sword, but you face an even more dangerous battlefield, that of the mind. Pornography and modern excesses are sophisticated versions of this same trap, and the question is simple: who is winning inside you? The disciplined warrior, who understands that his energy is sacred, or the slave of desire, who gives his strength for a few minutes of empty pleasure? If you want to continue this war and become stronger every day, subscribe to this channel right now. This series is your arsenal. Each episode, a new weapon, each reflection, a new strategy. And tell me, how many times have you felt defeated even before fighting, simply because you gave your energy to lust? How many battles in your life could have been won if you had saved that strength instead of wasting it? This is the reflection that opens our path. And now, let's dive into the brutal price that lust exacted on the battlefield. The price of lust on the battlefield. To understand the contempt that ancient warriors had for lust, you need to look at the battlefield. There, every detail decided life or death. A misstep, a distracted look, a hesitation of seconds, and the enemy's blade found the body. In this environment of steel, blood, and discipline, any weakness was fatal, and excess pleasure was considered exactly that, a weakness. A distracted soldier is a dead soldier. This phrase could be inscribed on the walls of Sparta, in the warrior schools of feudal Japan, or in the monasteries that trained warrior monks. Because unmeasured pleasure stole attention, undermined discipline, dissolved courage. The man who indulged too much in desire woke up the next day heavier, slower, more vulnerable. The sparkle in his eyes faded, his body seemed less agile, and his mind became lazy, sluggish, unfocused. The generals knew this. Leaders of armies imposed strict rules on their men, often prohibiting excesses before battles. It wasn't superstition, it was military strategy. They understood that lust weakened readiness, stole the inner flame that needed to be incandescent at the moment of combat. And this metaphor crosses centuries to this day. How many modern battles are lost, not for lack of resources, but by weakened men, exhausted, drained by lust? How many projects, relationships, dreams, and careers don't founder because the warrior who should be fighting is exhausted before even leaving home? Pornography, in this sense, is like an enemy infiltrated in the camp. It doesn't attack with swords, it doesn't shed blood, but it sabotages the ranks from within, corrupts discipline, steals vital energy. And when the battle of life begins, whether it's a challenge at work, an important exam, or even a decisive moment in a relationship, the man who has given in to excess presents himself weak, empty, unable to sustain the fight. Lust has always been seen as treason, not a betrayal against others, but against oneself. Because when the warrior surrenders to uncontrolled pleasure, he is stabbing himself in the back. He is saying to the enemy, "Take it, I weaken my own forces to facilitate your victory." This lesson echoes, a distracted soldier is a dead soldier. On yesterday's battlefield or in today's invisible wars, the rule is the same. Sparta and absolute discipline. Among all the peoples of antiquity, few understood the connection between discipline, strength, and power, as well as the Spartans. For them, life was a continuous training, an uninterrupted preparation for war. From childhood, each boy was torn from the comfort of his family and thrown into the rigor of the agog, the Spartan education system, where he learned that every weakness would be punished harshly, every slip could be costly. Within this environment of steel, lust had no space. The Spartan warrior could not afford to lose himself in momentary pleasures, because his mission was greater than himself. It was to live and die for the city, for Sparta, for the collective. In Sparta, there was no room for excesses. Eating too much, talking too much, seeking unnecessary pleasures, all this was considered treason to the greater cause of the polis. Sexual discipline was part of this unwritten code. They understood, almost instinctively, that the body needed to be kept firm, strong, prepared. Lust was seen as a poison that softened the muscles, weakened the mind, and made the warrior less attentive. Therefore, restraint was cultivated as a virtue. Self-control was not just a moral quality, it was a survival requirement. Ancient accounts speak of warriors who resisted temptations as they resisted cold, hunger, and fear, with absolute determination. They knew that each pleasure yielded before its time stole vigor at the moment when they needed it most. The body was treated as a temple of war, not as a toy of the instincts. Whoever indulged in immediate pleasure was seen as a coward, unable to bear the weight of the true battle. For the Spartans, conquering oneself was the first step before conquering any external enemy. This absolute discipline explains why Sparta was feared throughout the ancient world. Its ranks were composed of men who not only trained the body, but also the mind. They understood that war began in the silence of the soul, and within that silence, lust was the voice that needed to be silenced. The warrior who managed to control this inner fire was the one who entered the field with firm eyes, an unwavering heart, and intact energy. Victory was just a consequence. And here is a point that few notice. This discipline was not just individual, it was collective. The man who allowed himself to be dominated by desires was not just a threat to himself, but to the entire phalanx. An individual failure could open the entire formation, putting dozens of lives at risk. Therefore, sexual discipline was seen as part of the pact of loyalty between warriors. The soldier who guarded his energy did so not only for his own pride, but to honor his brothers, not to falter beside them. This brutal code made Sparta remembered as synonymous with discipline. And the detail that few realize is that sexual discipline was a central part of this gear. It was not taboo, it was not moralism, it was survival strategy. The warrior who allowed himself to be dominated by lust was considered as dangerous to the ranks as a traitor, because uncontrolled desire weakens not only the individual, it weakens the group. And in Sparta, each man was part of a collective body. If one fell, all would pay the price. Therefore, when we think of the Spartans and their fame of being invincible, we need to remember that this invincibility began before the battlefield. It began in the control of what no enemy could snatch away, the most intimate instincts. The Spartan warrior knew that if he was defeated within himself, he would have no chance against the enemy's spear. Samurai and the way of Bushido. On the other side of the world, in feudal Japan, a similar philosophy flourished, but with its own colors. Bushido, the way of the warrior. For the samurai, life was guided by a code of honor that went far beyond sword skills. Honor, loyalty, discipline, and self-control were non-negotiable pillars. In this code, lust was not seen only as weakness, but as dishonor, and dishonor was worse than death. A samurai who allowed himself to be dragged by uncontrolled desires was compared to a rusty sword. It could still cut, but it no longer inspired confidence. Honor demanded mental clarity, firm posture, eyes that did not tremble before the enemy. And how to achieve this clarity if the mind was occupied by fantasies, distractions, and excesses? Bushido taught that the warrior should be whole, present, focused. Lust stole this wholeness, divided the spirit, weakened the will. More than soldiers, the samurai were living symbols of self-control. Many of them practiced meditation rituals, exhaustive training, and even fasts, all to keep the mind sharp and the body obedient. Pleasure could not be lord, it had to be servant. And every time the samurai mastered his desires, it was as if he sharpened his inner blade. The control of instinct turned into spiritual strength, into dignity that could not be broken even by death. Feudal Japan is full of stories of warriors who rejected excesses to keep their honor intact. Some accounts speak of samurai who, before decisive battles, practiced total abstinence from worldly pleasures, isolating themselves in temples, meditating for hours, strengthening the spirit. It wasn't superstition, it was strategy. They knew that a mind polluted by desires became slow, insecure, vulnerable. The body might even be trained, but without mental clarity, the sword wavers at the decisive moment. Bushido demanded that the samurai live with both feet firmly planted in discipline. He should be ready to die at any moment, but for that, he needed to live with total clarity in the present. And lust was precisely the opposite, an impulse that diverted the mind, that dragged the man into fantasies without substance, that weakened his presence. The warrior who got lost in this was no longer reliable for his community, for his clan, or for his lord. He was seen as a weak link, and a weak link compromised the entire chain. In Bushido, each daily choice was a silent test of character. Eating in moderation, speaking only what was necessary, controlling impulses, all this was training for the great moments. The samurai who learned to say no to small temptations was training the muscle that would say no to fear at the time of battle. It was a daily rehearsal of courage, and lust with its promise of immediate pleasure was a constant test of this courage. Feudal Japan is full of examples of warriors who remained pure in their discipline, rejecting excesses to keep their honor intact. It wasn't just about religion or tradition, it was about identity. A samurai who could not govern himself was not worthy of bearing the title. He could wear the armor, he could carry the katana, but he would not have the heart of a true warrior. And this mentality echoes to this day as a timeless lesson. True power is not crushing the enemy, but mastering oneself. A man who cannot contain his desires may seem free, but he is a slave. A man who governs them may seem contained, but he is invincible. Bushido did not tolerate slaves of desire, only warriors who walked with their heads held high, with courage in their eyes and honor in their hearts. This philosophy, which has crossed centuries, shows that the samurai did not see lust as a simple human desire, but as a deadly trap. He knew that the sword could be stolen, but the mind was only lost if he gave it away, and giving his mind to immediate pleasure was, for him, the greatest defeat of all. The samurai who learned to resist was not just following a code, he was forging an internal fortress. Each act of self-control was another brick in this invisible castle, and when the battle arrived, this invisible castle became as solid as the stone walls that protected his clan. Warrior monks and asceticism. Among the silent mountains of Asia and in the hidden monasteries of medieval Europe, a unique type of warrior was born: the warrior monks. They carried not only swords, bows, or spears, they also carried an unwavering commitment to spiritual discipline, and a fundamental part of this discipline was asceticism, the conscious rejection of lust and excesses. For them, true strength was not in the size of the muscles, but in the clarity of the mind and the purity of the soul. The warrior monks of Buddhism, such as the famous Shaolin monks, trained for hours under sun or snow, in prolonged fasts, in absolute silence. Their training was not only physical, it was spiritual. They believed that every time they mastered carnal desire, they were in fact strengthening their mind against distractions and fears. On the other side of the world, Christian warrior monks such as the Knights Templar also followed a similar logic. Before each battle, they made vows of chastity and severe discipline. It wasn't just blind faith, It was mental preparation. This asceticism was not seen as a denial of life, but as a way to govern it. They believed that each contained impulse turned into a spark of spiritual energy. This energy, accumulated over time, manifested as clarity in training, courage in combat, serenity in trials. The warrior who did not yield to easy pleasure became master of himself, and whoever is master of himself can face any enemy without fear. A divided man is always a weak man, but a man united in purpose is practically unbreakable. And perhaps this is one of the most forgotten secrets of the modern world. Warrior monks did not reject lust because they were naive, but because they knew the devastating effects of unbridled desire. They saw lust as an invisible chain, capable of trapping even the strongest body. For them, yielding was allowing the enemy to settle inside the walls. Therefore, they practiced fasts, long nights in prayer, and exercises of severe discipline. Each moment of containment was another brick in the inner fortress. The Shaolin, for example, believed that sexual energy could be transmuted into vital force, what they called qi. Guarding this energy was like storing fire in a sacred vessel. This fire could be directed to faster blows, resistance in prolonged battles, and clarity in critical situations. The Templars, on the other hand, saw chastity as a vow of supreme loyalty. By rejecting immediate pleasures, they proved that they were committed not to themselves, but to the greater mission they carried. This asceticism molded almost unbreakable warriors. They became capable of facing extreme privations without losing focus. A man who learns to say no to lust also learns to say no to fear, to hunger, to fatigue. He discovers that pain is temporary, but honor is eternal. Each resisted temptation was celebrated as an invisible victory, more important than any duel, because without this inner victory, no external conquest could last. Thus, the warrior monks proved that sexual discipline and spiritual discipline were inseparable. They knew that the man divided within himself never achieves full victory. Therefore, they fought with the same intensity against disordered desires and against the armies that threatened their lands. The sword and the prayer went hand in hand. Steel and silence were two sides of the same coin. This legacy echoes to this day. The greatest warriors are not those who win external battles, but those who first win within themselves. The reasoning behind abstinence. But why did so many warrior cultures reject lust? What was the logic that sustained this discipline? The reasoning is simpler and deeper than it seems. They understood, even without modern scientific terms, that sexual energy was one of the most powerful forces of the human being, and when misdirected, this force turned into weakness. But when contained and redirected, it became a source of courage, vigor, and clarity. Think of sexual energy as the water of a mighty river. If it flows uncontrollably, it causes floods, destroys villages, drags everything in its path. But if man builds dikes, canals, and turbines, that same water turns into a source of light, movement, life. That's how the warriors saw it. Unbridled lust was a flood that devastated the soul. Abstinence was the engineering of discipline, capable of transforming chaos into organized force. The Spartans, the samurai, the monks, and so many others knew, intuitively, that guarding this energy was like guarding gunpowder for the right moment. Spending it carelessly, in fantasies or meaningless pleasures, was wasting ammunition before the war. The warrior who kept his energy intact arrived on the battlefield sharper, more present, more alive. He carried not only a sword, he carried within himself an accumulated flame, ready to be released at the decisive moment. This reasoning was also supported by practical observations. They realized that the men who constantly indulged in lust became lazy, apathetic, without sparkle in their eyes. Those who maintained self-control stood out for their vitality, their firmness of spirit, their ability to withstand long journeys without faltering. It was as if sexual self-control was the silent basis of all other virtues. And even without the language of modern neuroscience, they understood that immediate pleasure creates slaves, while containment creates leaders. Today, we know that pornography hijacks the dopamine circuits of the brain, turning strong men into addicts of cheap stimulus. The ancients did not have magnetic resonance imaging to prove this, but they had attentive eyes. They clearly saw the difference between a man given to desire and a man who dominated it. The first walked bent over, the second stood up firmly. This reasoning crosses centuries and reaches us with the same clarity. Lust was not rejected by whim or moralism, but because it weakened the warrior in his essence. Abstinence, on the other hand, was not an end in itself, but a means of channeling greater forces. It was the art of saying no to cheap pleasure to say yes to the victory that lasts. It was the daily training of freedom. Because true freedom is not doing everything you want, but having the power to choose what really strengthens you. Therefore, sexual discipline was not just a cultural detail, but a central part of warrior reasoning. It was not taboo, it was strategy. It was not repression, it was power. They understood that mastering lust was the basis for mastering the battlefield and ultimately life itself. The man who learned to guard his inner fire became as dangerous as a volcano, silent on the outside, but with an incandescent force ready to explode at the right moment. Modern addiction as weakness. Today, the battle no longer takes place before the walls of a besieged city or on the bloodied plains of an ancient war. The battlefield is now invisible, silent, and is found inside each room, in front of each screen, hidden in pockets, in the glow of the small lights that flash on cell phones. Pornography is the modern weapon that destroys men without shedding a drop of blood. It steals energy, discipline, and purpose in the same way that in the past, lust stole the strength of warriors. If a Spartan, a samurai, or a Templar were transported to the present day, they would be shocked. They would see millions of men of all ages bent before small luminous screens, giving their vitality to artificial images. For the ancient warriors, this would be a sign of decadence, because they knew that nothing destroys a man more than wasting his energy on something that does not produce life, does not generate legacy, does not strengthen the community. Modern addiction, in their eyes, would be the greatest of signs of weakness, the proof that the enemy has already won even before the fight begins. In ancient times, excesses were fought against because they physically weakened the warrior. Overeating, drinking too much, indulging in momentary pleasures meant fighting the next day slower, weaker, more vulnerable. Today, pornography does the same, but in an even crueler way, because it directly attacks the mind. It hijacks the brain's chemistry, conditions men to seek pleasure without effort, corrodes their patience, kills their desire to fight for something greater. It's like a silent rust. On the outside, the sword still looks shiny, but on the inside, it's already consumed. An ancient warrior seeing this would have no doubt in his analysis. The modern man is a distracted soldier, and a distracted soldier is a dead soldier. Because if before the enemy's spear killed the body, today it is the screen that kills the spirit. And when the spirit dies, everything else crumbles along with it. Discipline, courage, the ability to love truly, physical vigor, everything is lost like sand slipping through your fingers. Pornography is poison disguised as entertainment. It creates docile men, incapable of rising up against injustices, incapable of enduring silence, incapable of facing pain and sacrifice. Men who could be leaders, but prefer to be spectators. Men who could be builders, but prefer to be consumers. While ancient warriors were remembered for their honor and discipline, the men of today are being shaped to be remembered only as prisoners of their own desires. And perhaps the most serious of all is that this war is silent. There are no screams, no clashing swords, no blood spilled on the ground. What there is just a man alone lying in his bed, surrendering his energy to the screen. He believes he is just having fun, but in reality, he is digging his own inner grave. This is the most effective slavery, the one that the prisoner believes to be freedom. Modern addiction, therefore, is not just an individual problem, it is a collective threat. An army of weakened men can never sustain a strong society. What is at stake is not just the life of an isolated man, but the future of families, communities, entire nations. Because when men surrender to addiction, they stop protecting, they stop leading, they stop inspiring. They become shadows of themselves. This is the weakness that the modern enemy has chosen. He no longer needs to kill men with swords or arrows. He just needs to anesthetize them with easy pleasure. They do the rest themselves. They surrender their energy, their discipline, and their honor without resistance. This is the invisible war that we are losing, and that needs to be denounced with the same intensity with which the ancients denounced betrayal within the ranks. Because in the end, modern addiction is exactly that: betrayal against oneself, against one's own strength, against one's own history. When pleasure becomes a chain, the Stoic philosophers already said that he who is dominated by desire is a slave, even if he lives in palaces. And this truth crosses the centuries like a sharp blade. For ancient warriors, this was not just theory, it was experience. They knew in practice that uncontrolled pleasure had the power to chain the strongest man, transforming him into a servant of his own instincts. What begins as quick relief becomes prison, and what seemed like choice reveals itself as a chain. Imagine a soldier marching with his army. On the outside, he wears shining armor, carries a shield and sword, seems prepared to fight. But on the inside, he drags invisible chains that weigh tons. He walks but does not advance. He fights, but is already defeated. This image is not just a metaphor. It is the reality of millions who live imprisoned by pleasures they do not know how to master. They continue to exist, but they do not live. They continue to walk, but they do not arrive anywhere. Pleasure, when not controlled, always transforms into a chain. It begins as something small, a seemingly harmless practice, almost insignificant. But little by little it wraps around the spirit until it becomes an invisible prison. This is the most dangerous prison of all because it cannot be seen. It does not appear to others, it does not leave marks on the body, but it suffocates the soul. It acts in silence, in solitude, in the moments when the man promises himself that he will change, but continues to give in. This invisible chain weighs as much as iron, but it binds even more, because it acts on the spirit. Ancient warriors understood this dynamic. For them, each broken chain was a greater victory than any external conquest. Because there is no glory in defeating armies if you continue to be a prisoner of yourself. The enemy that comes from outside may even kill the body. Desire, when not controlled, kills the soul. Therefore, containment was treated as liberation and abstinence as an act of rebellion against inner slavery. Stoicism reinforced this point with clarity. The truly free man is not the one who does everything he wants, but the one who masters his own impulses. Pornography, in this sense, is the absolute negation of freedom. It places desire on the throne and reason in the basement. It transforms men into subjects of fleeting pleasures, incapable of governing their own lives. The warrior who allows himself to be chained in this way is already defeated before even entering the battle. The ancients taught that pleasure needed to be tamed. They did not talk about denying the existence of desire, but about domesticating it, about placing it in its proper place. Because when pleasure becomes lord, man becomes slave. But when man governs pleasure, he becomes king of himself. This was the true crown that the warriors sought, not the one made of gold, but the one made of self-control. And this lesson is even more valuable today because the modern chain is not made of iron, but of pixels. What binds man is not steel handcuffs, but images projected on screens. And yet the weight is real. Men carry this slavery every day without realizing that they live bent over, without realizing that they drag shackles. Pornography is this invisible chain that binds millions, and there is only one way to break it. Recover self-control, rise up against oneself, declare war on unrestrained desire. This is the eternal logic. Pleasure can be a useful servant, but it is always a tyrannical lord. When man governs it, he enriches his life. When pleasure governs man, it destroys everything. The warriors knew this and therefore chose discipline. They knew that true freedom was not living without visible chains, but living without chains on the soul. And this is the call that echoes to this day. Either you break pleasure, or pleasure will break you. The strength that comes from containment. For ancient warriors, resisting lust was not just a matter of morality, but of strategy. They saw in self-control not a burden, but a secret weapon. Each time the man said no to immediate pleasure, he was in fact saying yes to a greater force that grew within him. Containment was like a bow that, when tensioned, accumulates energy. The more you hold the string, the more devastating the shot. The warrior who resisted desire was like this bow. He carried within himself a power that could be released at the right moment, with precision and overwhelming power. Imagine an army composed of men who never waste their energy, who guard every drop of vigor as if it were sacred. These men did not arrive on the battlefield tired, exhausted, or emptied. On the contrary, they arrived like volcanoes about to explode, full of contained fire, ready to unleash their fury against the enemy. This was the logic that sustained the discipline of the ancients. Each temptation resisted was like accumulating fuel for the future battle. And here is a truth that modern man needs to understand. Self-control is the source of true confidence. The man who manages to master his carnal instincts learns that he can master anything. If he can say no to the most basic desire, then he can say no to fear, to laziness, to cowardice. Each act of resistance builds an invisible wall around the soul, making the man firmer, more solid, more unbreakable. This force is not theoretical, it is real. Those who practice containment perceive concrete changes. More physical energy, more mental clarity, more firmness in decisions. It is no coincidence. Modern science explains that sexual energy, when not drained compulsively, transforms into vitality, increases the production of essential hormones, strengthens the body and mind. The ancients did not have laboratories to prove this, but they had attentive eyes to observe the results. They knew that the man given to lust walked bent over, with a dull look without vigor. The man who practiced containment, on the other hand, walked with firmness, radiated strength, inspired confidence. And this inspiration was contagious. It strengthened the group, motivated the brothers in arms, created an atmosphere of invincibility. Because the strength that comes from containment is not just individual, it overflows. It affects everyone around. This is the forgotten lesson. Resisting pleasure is not losing, it is winning. Each time you resist, you are accumulating ammunition, energy, and clarity for the moments when you will need it most. Life, after all, is full of unexpected battles. And when they arrive, only those who have saved their strength have something to offer. The others have already spent everything in moments of illusion. Therefore, self-control has always been seen as the ultimate virtue. Ancient warriors knew that he who masters himself is more dangerous than he who masters 1,000 enemies. Because the external battle can be won with a sword, but the internal battle is only won with discipline. And discipline transforms the common man into a hero, transforms the fragile into strong, transforms the defeated into invincible. Up to here, we have explored how the ancients saw lust, how they treated sexual discipline not as a taboo but as a survival strategy, and how containment transformed common men into almost unbeatable warriors. Now, the reflection needs to be brought to the present. If a Spartan entered your house today, what would he see? Would he see you as a warrior ready to resist modern temptations, or would he see someone surrendered who gives his energy every day to a screen? If a samurai observed your routine, would he say that you honor your discipline or that you dishonor your own spirit? If a warrior monk looked inside your mind, would he find silence and clarity, or invisible chains and cries of uncontrolled desires? This is the question that needs to echo within you. Ancient warriors fought bloody battles, faced enemies of flesh and blood, but they also knew that the most difficult fight was against themselves. Today you don't need to face spears, swords, or arrows, but you face an even more challenging battle, the battle against easy pleasure, against the illusion of pornography, against the invisible shackles of addiction. And this is where I want your interaction. Do you think the ancient warriors would see pornography as a sign of strength or of weakness? Answer in the comments. Your answer is not just an opinion, but a reflection of how you see your own life. Because this question goes beyond historical reflection. It directly touches your reality. By commenting, you will be confronting yourself, you will be looking inside, you will be taking a position. You can even choose to remain silent, but silence is also a choice, and often it is the choice of those who remain chained. So comment right now. For you, would pornography be seen by ancient warriors as strength or weakness? Leave your answer, share your vision. This interaction is not just to engage, it is to open a wound, It is to force you to look in the mirror and face head-on what you may have avoided until today. And remember, each written word is also a commitment. By commenting, you declare aloud what may have only been hidden inside you. The ancients did not leave questions unanswered. They acted, they positioned themselves, they chose the path of honor. Today, it is your turn to choose. The forgotten wisdom. The modern world prides itself on its advances, its technologies, its science that seems to have an answer for everything. But, in the midst of so much pride, we forget something that the ancients already knew for centuries. Unrestrained lust destroys man from within before any enemy touches him from the outside. The warrior cultures of all corners of the planet, each in its own way, had already identified this poison. Spartans, samurai, warrior monks, Templar knights, all understood that the man who does not govern his desires cannot govern anything else, and yet this wisdom has been buried by the haste and arrogance of the present. Today we call freedom what for the ancients would be seen as slavery. We call fun what they would call decadence, and thus we confuse pleasure with purpose. We confuse stimulation with fulfillment. We confuse chains with wings. The result is a generation of men who believe they are free, but who carry invisible shackles every day. This forgotten wisdom was not hidden in complicated treaties, but engraved in the very experience of life. The ancients observed, the man who indulged too much in desire weakened, became ill, became vulnerable. The man who practiced discipline flourished, gained respect, became a leader. It was simple, clear, obvious. But the obvious was forgotten, and in its place arose a lie, that pleasure without limits is the height of human freedom. And see the irony. The more we believe in this lie, the more fragile we become. Modern science proves what the ancients already intuited. Dopamine circuits are hijacked. The brain collapses from stimuli. The body loses vitality. The mind loses focus. But we still insist on laughing at the advice of the ancestors, as if they were outdated moralisms, when, in fact, they were warning us about something that only now we can measure in laboratories. The forgotten wisdom is that lust always takes a price, and the price is never small. It presents itself in the form of unexplained tiredness, constant anxiety, broken relationships, a feeling of emptiness that does not pass. It is the invisible invoice of each pleasure consumed without discipline. The ancients knew this, and that is why they armed themselves against this internal enemy with more rigor than against any external army. Today, we need to rescue this vision. We need to look back not with blind nostalgia, but with humility. We need to recognize that in many aspects we were stronger in the past than we are now, and perhaps the greatest proof of this is the way we deal with lust. What they called poison, we call pastime. What they called weakness, we call lifestyle. This inversion of values is not progress. It is a fall. The forgotten wisdom is a cry that echoes from the past. Govern yourself, or be governed. Master desire, or be a slave to it. This is the lesson that the warriors bequeathed, and that we urgently need to remember. The modern man and the warrior's discipline. The modern man likes to compare himself with the ancient warriors, but rarely lives as they lived. He wears t-shirts printed with stoic phrases, watches battle movies, repeats mantras about strength and discipline. But, in practice, he bends before the first cheap desire that appears on the screen. The contrast is painful. While the ancients shaped their identity by containment, we shape ours by indulgence. But there is still hope, because the warrior's discipline is not lost. It can be rescued, recreated, lived again. And this does not require living in Sparta or training in temples of feudal Japan. It requires something much deeper. It requires decision. The modern man needs to decide whether he will continue to be a servant of instincts or whether he will recover his dignity. Bringing the warrior's discipline to current life means learning to transform each daily choice into a courage training. It means learning to say no to small temptations, because it is this muscle that strengthens for the great battles. It means turning off the screen when it calls, even when it seems impossible. It means enduring the discomfort of resisting, because each discomfort endured is an invisible victory. And when this happens, something powerful begins to be born. Confidence. Not the superficial confidence of those who speak loudly or display muscles, but the silent confidence of those who know that they are their own master. This confidence is what inspired the ancient warriors, and it is what the modern man lacks. He may have money, he may have fame, he may have status, but if he does not govern his desires, he will always be a well-dressed slave. The warrior's discipline is also, paradoxically, a form of freedom, because the man who learns to contain himself discovers that he does not depend on anything external to be strong. He can be in silence, he can be alone, he can be without resources, but he still stands. This is true freedom, not being dragged by impulses, but walking with firmness, guided by purpose. The modern man needs this discipline not only for himself, but for the world around him, because families, communities, and even nations are shaped by the strength or weakness of their men. An army of disciplined warriors can change history. An army of addicted men trapped on screens only watches history happen. Therefore, the warrior's discipline is not just a memory of the past. It is a call to the present. It is the decision to live with honor in a world that promotes decadence. It is the choice to be an example in a time when examples have been lost. It is the courage to face not only external enemies, but above all the internal enemy that whispers, "Give in, surrender, no one will know." But the warrior knows that there is always someone who knows, himself, and it is for this awareness that he chooses to resist. This is the discipline that needs to be restored in the modern man. This is the discipline that separates those who only survive from those who really live. Ancient warriors did not see discipline only as a tool to win battles, but as a call to honor. The rejection of lust was not a whim or superstition, it was the basis of their identity. Being a warrior did not only mean wielding weapons, but carrying within oneself a code. And within this code, containment was proof of character, a mark of who was worthy of trust. A man who could not control his desires was not seen as worthy of leading, protecting, or inspiring. Honor, therefore, was always linked to self-mastery. A Spartan knew that his life did not belong to him completely. It belonged to the polis. A samurai knew that his sword was not just a weapon, it was a reflection of his soul. A Templar knew that his chastity was not just a religious vow, it was proof that he was committed to something greater. In all these examples, the message was clear. Giving in to lust was not just weakness, it was dishonor. The call to honor echoes to this day, even amidst the noise of the modern world. And it does not ask, it demands. It demands that the man look in the mirror and answer the simplest and most brutal question, am I worthy of trusting myself? Because this is the root of the whole issue. It is not about religion, culture, or era. It is about character. The man who betrays himself in the face of temptation also betrays everyone around him, even if no one sees it. The ancients knew that lust stole more than energy. It stole dignity. The man who surrendered to desire lost the right to speak of courage, lost the right to lead, lost the right to present himself as an example. His life could continue, but his honor was stained. And for warriors who built their identity on this word, this was worse than death itself. And this is the tragedy of the present. We live in a time when the word honor has been forgotten. Today everything is negotiable, everything is disposable, everything is replaceable. But the ancient warriors knew that honor is not negotiated. Once broken, it is hardly recovered. And it is exactly for this reason that they guarded their discipline with so much zeal, because they knew that losing control over oneself was losing honor. This is the invitation to the modern man. Rescue this honor, not as a museum piece, not as a distant memory, but as a living principle. Because the world does not need more consumers, it does not need men who bend before every cheap desire. The world needs men of honor, men who can be followed, men who can be remembered, men who can be feared not by the scream, but by the example. Honor is not in always winning, but in never betraying oneself. And for the warrior, resisting lust was the greatest symbol of loyalty to himself and to his people. This is the essence of the call to honor, to live in such a way that even your instincts bow before your discipline, the shield against lust. Ancient warriors knew, the man who conquers lust is invincible. This phrase could be engraved on each sword, on each shield. on each wall erected against external enemies. Because in the end, every enemy from outside was just a reflection of a greater enemy within, and he who mastered himself had nothing to fear. The shield against lust was not made of bronze or iron. It was made of discipline, of silence, of resistance. It was invisible, but more solid than any stone wall. This shield did not protect only the body. It protected the mind, the heart, the essence. He who wielded this shield could cross temptations and remain intact, could face external battles without carrying internal chains. Today, this shield needs to be wielded again. In a world that promotes indulgence as a virtue, resisting becomes an act of rebellion. In a culture that calls addiction freedom, practicing discipline is an act of courage. In an era in which millions drag invisible chains, being free is a revolutionary act. The shield against lust is therefore more than defense. It is a symbol of identity. And here in the closing, you need to make a decision. There is no middle ground. There is no neutrality. Either you raise your shield or you throw it on the ground. Either you choose discipline or you choose slavery. Either you write your life as a warrior or as a prisoner. The choice is yours, but the consequence will be eternal. Subscribe now to this channel and comment the word honor. Publicly declare your commitment to live as a warrior, to wield your invisible shield against lust, and to no longer be a prisoner of yourself. And this was the video I prepared for you. And the fight does not end here. The next episode is already appearing on your screen now. Click and continue marching with me, because the war against lust can only be won step by step, day after day.